Pigeons 420. Mr. Grow It. From the staff.
Thank you, AC Infinity, for sponsoring today's video. If you're looking for new pots, consider checking out AC Infinity's Fabric Smart Pots. Their heavy-duty material is crafted with double-stitched nylon handles and 500-gram thick non-woven fabric that makes a permeable, tear-proof wall for excess water draining and maximum stability. If you want to check out their pots, go to acinfinity.com, use promo code THESTASH15, and consider saving a few dollars and getting yourself some quality pots.
This episode is brought to you by Stash Blend. I've been using Stash Blend for over a year now, and it's awesome. One of the things that I really like is that it saves me money. It's a whole bunch of different inputs in one. So I no longer have to go out there and buy a silica bottle, then a separate seaweed bottle, beneficial bacteria, then a separate one for mycorrhizal fungi. All of that plus more is in this one blend. Go to stashblend.com to learn more about it, and I also have a link down in the YouTube description section below.
Well, gentlemen, here we are, the Perfecta.
Back at it one more time.
Good job. Bam. Man, back at it. Great to have you guys back here in the coop, man. Always a good time when we are chilling together. Crazy things happening, and man, I'm really stoked because this time we're going tubing, man, and I'm like super stoked about this.
On a river.
Tubing, yeah, not behind the back of a boat, but we're gonna take
down
the
a mountain.
We're going
Snowy
like
mountain.
Lazy River tubing. Lazy River. We got a place in Michigan called
Lazy
Michigan
River.
Adventure, and they have the Lazy River.
Yep.
And you get on a little tube, you chill, dog. And then there's these mushrooms that rain on you, and you go by them, and but then you put yourself back in because you're like, I like it. That's what I'm hoping we're going to experience here.
It's
mushrooms.
gonna be, yeah.
Raining on us.
Well, there will be beer.
One
There
thing
will
we
be
could have
heat.
gotten that we should have gotten if I knew we were doing that was mushrooms that rain on us.
Oh, I still could.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, welcome to Canada. That shit
Home
shows
of
up
the
at your door
brave.
too. But also too, the best thing about this is like we each get our own little raft. We get our own little tube. We pull a tube behind us.
Three-person from the step four.
I can fit us all in one. And then we pull the beer behind us, and every time you need a drink, you just pull the cooler towards the boat. You get yourself a drink, and you just keep on keeping on, man.
Of course, lots of smokes as well.
Oh, yeah.
I'm gonna be rolling up.
We're gonna keep
doobies
'em-
for this, boys.
Some
We're in Canada,
doobies.
dubs, brother.
Doobies. You got to keep them in a Ziploc bag, I'm thinking.
100%.
Right?
So
I've been to
water.
Michigan.
Yeah, it would be
Yeah,
a
lose them
disaster.
all.
We got the Grand River. It's nasty. It's gross. But we got the Grand River. We got a bunch of different rivers in Michigan that people love going tubing on. I am a hermit. Don't leave my house. So I often say no to go. But we're out here, so I'm excited to do it.
Yeah.
100%,
Oh, it's
yeah.
going to be fun.
Back when I lived in Boston, I was born and raised right outside there. Everyone would go travel up to Maine, Saco, Maine.
Talking about Maine?
Maybe somebody viewing this has had that experience because that's pretty wild. It's exactly like you're explaining, where you're tubing or rafting and just floating down the river so slow, and it's over a period of hours. And it's kind of like a party because there's so many different groups of people that are all kind of floating at the same time. And then there's campsites at the end. So you float down the river for several hours, and then you camp overnight. And we would do like a week at a time, and every day doing the same thing over and over again. And, oh, it was so much fun, so much fun. So I'm looking forward to here where it's not as populated. It's just going to be us kind of floating around. It's going to be a little bit more peaceful, but we'll still be getting wild in our own little bubble.
Bare minimum.
Bare essentials.
Just what it takes
and
for
bears.
us to be Bear Grylls, for us to just be the homies, to come together. We got Winxus on. It's going to be, this is the things that we miss when we go and do these events, when we link up to make content. We're normally just grind. It looks fun, haha, cool, but we don't have time to really bond and do some cool stuff. So this is going to be a great opportunity to just chill, relax, not think about work. We'll still talk business,
Of course.
but
We love our
Have a good
jobs.
time.
Can't escape that, man.
yeah, it is what it is.
However, we got a topic at hand, boys, even though we could probably sit here and talk about the Canadian wilderness and
Bear
how much we're going
Grylls.
to enjoy it for an entire episode. We're going to be talking about Bear Grylls and the bear necessities. You don't know that reference, eh, Rob?
I don't. My
Me
thing
neither.
is the singing Disney songs
Jungle
when I was a
Book.
kid, I didn't get down with. As soon as they
Is
started
Jungle Book
singing,
Disney?
I'm like, oh, God. Of course.
Isn't it? Is
Yeah.
it? Yeah. I'm
Yeah.
assuming it is. Yeah, I would assume. It's not Pixar. I guess that was long before Pixar
No,
came
no,
around.
yeah, Pixar
Pixar's
was,
first movie was
Toy Story. Yeah.
Yeah, the first CGI film ever created, not using pictures. It ain't goose.
Other than the moon landing.
Oh, definitely also done by Disney. No, just kidding. Bare necessities.
The bare necessities, bare essentials.
Bare minimum.
Growing
Bare-
with the bare minimum.
Because let's face it, this is a plant. It's a bean. Needs to go into a medium with a little water and a light source. It doesn't need to be too complicated, and we specialize in overcomplicating this plant.
But with
Let's
the
be
bare
real.
minimum,
Let's be
make
real.
sure you get Stash Plan and AC Infinity. Discount code is Stash15. No,
They,
but this is an
it-
episode that is for the people who are a little bit more balling on a budget, who can't afford. They got a family, they got a life, they got things, debts. It's North
Or
America.
maybe you just don't want to have a huge impact on the
well that, but I'm saying
the power grid. Maybe you just don't have an impact on your family budget. Maybe you're going to do it with bare necessities.
very hippie like of you, and I appreciate that. Barefoot too.
Bare feet. You're going to do this barefooted.
You're going barefoot, but
Naked.
this is a great opportunity for those who may want to transition into growing and don't want to invest a bunch before they grow because they're like, man, I just want to see if I can keep it alive.
Mhm.
You know, I'm not going to go spend $1,000 and get a grow kit and get nutrients and buy 8-ounce bag of Stash Blend from stashblend.com, of course, and
For $8.
for $8 probably. But essentially to have the ability to get your feet wet, you know? And I think it's a great way to start. You know, when I first got going, I was one of those plant sill pimps where I just put a plant on the windowsill and thought maybe I'd grow it. And you can start your seedling in a sense with just the basics, and that would be just with some dirt, soil would be, and put it in a container, base water it, and put it at the windowsill or let it be outside to just get it alive. And I think that's the most bare. It's going to take a little longer than having artificial lighting and nutrients and nutrient-rich soils, but you can get it going very easily, just in that sense. That's how a lot of us who started doing it did it. We put it in our parents' house plant. We had a little piece that we hid near a window and then hid it in our closet. That was a good starting point to get a seedling going.
Yeah, if you want to do it indoors, absolutely. Outdoors, just plant directly into the ground, assuming that your soil is good, has nutrition
Especially
in
in
it.
Las Vegas.
Las Vegas, I can't do that. It will not work for me. Less than 1% organic matter in there, that won't work. But yeah, just right in the ground. I remember it reminds me of a story where I had a couple plants in a small little container. I think it was like a 4-inch container in my backyard behind a tree, and my dad found them. He wiped those out so quickly. That was no bueno.
Bigger than the
good.
Nevada desert.
Yeah, I denied. I'm like, I don't know what these are. He's like, they're
Looking at your
plants.
sister, you're like,
I'm
hey, what the hell
are they?
is this?
Oh, okay. I ripped them out, and that was the end of that. Anyways,
Good thing he got rid of those neighbors planting in his backyard. How dare they?
I was trying to grow with the bare minimum. I was like 14, 15 at the time. I didn't have any money. You know what I mean? I was broke back then, and just found some potting soil from the local hardware store, and planted it in there, and just started to get to grow to begin. So yeah, that's just growing with the bare essentials to begin.
That's it. That's it. And whether you're going to go outside with the bare essentials, whether you're going to go inside with the bare essentials, I think there's different levels of bare essentials or that it really takes to grow. Whether you're just going to get into the bare essentials or the bare necessities of tent growing, do you need the full ventilation system? Do you need a whole VPD setup and tester and monitors? Do you need the air conditioners? We can start off in terms of, we just talked about doing the windowsill. We just talked about going outside. But I think if you're going to go inside and try to do a bare minimum of a grow space,
A basic indoor grow setup.
basic
Those
indoor, and I'm going to go like
cheap,
without a
affordable.
tent, because I think maybe that tent is the next level of someone who wants to just step into that next level of gardening. I grew in a room without a tent for a very long time. Actually, to start, it was in a closet. Had a shelf. It was very easy to pin things up to the top of the shelf, top of the closet on the roof, have it hanging down over the shelf. I just used the pots, and I would just water just like that. It was tight. It was already a contained area. Trying to keep it circulated was easy. That's when you have issues with humidity and temperature, and I feel like those are the battles that you really battle when you're at the bare necessities, because you haven't incorporated a heater, you haven't incorporated a humidifier, you probably don't have an air conditioner, and the light's probably pumping down quite a few lumens. I guess it's not lumens. It's
Photons.
photons. Thank you, because I say lumens and people beat me up for that one. But yeah, bare necessities going into a closet grow indoor. Nutrients. Bare minimum for nutrients. Believe it or not, I use Miracle Grow, man.
Gross.
Believe it or not, it does grow decent product.
You love your country?
Do you love your country?
Like, Jesus.
This was a long time ago. Now you don't need to use Miracle Grow. You could use Stash Blend. But the thing is that times have changed, right? So you can use something that you probably already have in the shed and utilize it in the garden.
Dude, you can literally use a base bloom nutrients, a base veg nutrients, and Stash Blend. And if you have a decent soil, you'll be okay. If you're using cocoa, which clearly wouldn't be the bare minimum, probably going to need to add a little extra for something for calcium and magnesium. For the most part, you could get away with your nutrient regimen being just that. CFL lighting if you wanted to. We had an episode about budget growing, but to make it grow decent, solid enough where you can argue indoor versus outdoor, I'd say you would at least need yourself a budget LED light that's going to bring you, maybe $200, $100, $150.
Yep.
$100. We'll say a USD, and that will get you. It could be a quantum board. AC Infinity has a quantum board light that'll work, and I've seen some people knock it out of the park with those. But that's going to be affordable on your electricity bill, so you can really keep it bare minimum in the sense of your power consumption. Maybe not the initial investment for equipment, but it's just enough light to work. You look at the propagation tent that you're growing. Honestly, that could work too. If you're a lighter consumer and you don't smoke like us, that may work. It's going to be harder, but it can work. I've seen people do it with CFLs, a bunch of them, spindly looking flower, but they take a few hits off a bud. Or like my uncle, he mixes with tobacco. Lived in Israel forever, so that's how they do it. So he's kind of stretching it out. He could have a plant that yields him an ounce and be good, be like, yeah, it'll last me for the month. So the bare minimum is a little subjective for indoor growing, but that's my recommendation for a bare minimum setup. It could just be an open space. You see people like Mr. Canuck who his veg space is like just an open room with lights hanging from the ceiling. You can totally do that. I mean, if you want to paint your walls white to make it easier, or use like poly, the black white poly that can Panda film. It can close in your room even, and that can make a makeshift tent. I don't think you need a tent right away, but for me, a bare minimum would be a cheap something, any tent, preferably AC Infinity, but cheap tent, cheap light, basic fan, doesn't need to oscillate, just some air movement, and it's going to work.
Yeah, you don't need a tent, bare minimum, but yeah. Without the tent, I mean, I want to piggyback off of what Pigeons was saying with the closet growing, because I think a lot of people start in closets, and I think that a lot of people are growing in closets right now, and that's one of the ways I started. Actually, before I started, I had a mentor, my buddy grew, and he had a closet set up, and he was growing what I think with the bare minimum at the time. Basically, his setup was, it was in one of those closets where it was underneath like the stairs. It was a closet from like
Harry
underneath
Potter's
the stairs.
house. Yeah.
So he had the door open, and he had a whole bunch of plants in there, and he had an HID light. This was back in the HID days. We're talking 2007, 2006 maybe.
Before a lot of you were born.
He laughs because it's true.
So it was back then, and he had soil, Fox Farm soil, Fox Farm nutrients. He just had the base nutrients. That's it. In containers. No inline fan, no ventilation at all. He just had the door open, but he had one of those oscillating fans on a stand, right? So the ones that stand up, and it was just pushing. It was outside of the closet, pushing in and just going and having that air movement in. So just thinking back at that time, he had, again, no ventilation at all. That's one thing I think a lot of people are like, oh, you must have ventilation. You must be exchanging the air. You can actually just keep your door open and have a fan blowing. Like if you're trying to just grow the plant to harvest and get to it and don't really care a whole lot about quality and yield and don't really want to dive too deep into it, you can get,
like good. You're okay with getting
if you're doing it because your wife told you have to.
You're good.
Some people are that way. Some people just want to grow the plant to harvest. They're like, as long as the effects, I don't care what it looks like. I don't care about bag appeal. I don't care about how much I get.
I always knew it. Just
have you seen his channel?
Different strokes for different folks.
No, you're right.
But that was a good example, I think, of the bare minimum. He was just kind of just trying to do things on a cheap level. He was broke as well, just as broke as I were. We were freaking kids, basically, 15, 16 years old at the time. Actually, I was a little bit older at that time, but bare minimum on the indoors. Yeah.
You gotta think most of the time, my little Montana accent.
Most of the time,
Most of the time, people are getting into this. You don't have a whole lot of A, influence, B, resources, money. You don't have a lot of outlets to purchase equipment, because if you're in a prohibitionist,
prohibition state.
Yeah, a prohibition state, then you're not growing anyway.
You don't have a mentor.
Right? You're not
You've got
growing.
one of us goofs on the internet.
You don't have access to this. You don't have
And that's
access to
horrible.
good stuff. You don't have access to lights. You don't want them sending stuff to your house because that's just heat. So it makes sense that there's going to be some people that are going to just stick it in a closet, put a little desk light over it, hope to goodness they're going to get a little something, and they would be
They'll use
satisfied
their lizard
because
their,
they're going to
lizard
use whatever they
light.
can. The lizard light. Yeah, the
Yeah.
little lizard light.
Lizard
the
light.
heat warming light. So
The lot lizard.
yeah, using the bare minimum is very important. I also agree with what Rob said. Is I do
Thank you.
believe that a bare minimum light would be like a
Quantum board.
a quantum board 100 watt. I think is what it is, a 100 watt series or something.
You can get 100 watts.
I think it's 100 watts for $100.
Quantum board
Quantum board. I'm not.
is a fun fact. That's
sorry.
HLG only.
Quantum theory.
Copyright HLG. So call it LED board.
LED board.
Oh, that's the truth.
I don't know if you
didn't
knew
know that.
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
HLG.
All right. Well,
Copyright
LED
trademark, whatever.
board. Like there's a lot of
Oh.
those that are
LED
very cheap.
Oh, yeah,
and
I thought
very
people said that
affordable.
just sounded
They're
dumb.
like $60 on Amazon now, these LED boards, and those will get you
That's what I'm saying.
through a
They
grill.
grow pretty good bud. I've seen people grow stuff that I'm like, damn, this was with that light? Like, yeah, dude. Like, those
Bro, it's
fat,
a
nice buds.
quality light. It's a quality light.
A lot of it's those give and takes things. It's like adding an accessory to a arms piece, we'll say. I don't want to get shut
Sure.
down by YouTube. Or it's like adding something cool to your vehicle. It can help. It'll help performance overall. Cool air intake on your sports vehicle. Great. Do you need it? No. Will it help? Yes, absolutely. Something with better heat sink and that's going to have better heat disbursement and light disbursement, of course, way better. But if you're just trying to get just enough to make it work so you can avoid the dispensary or avoid the plug that's trying to get you fent to, it's better off to just get something cheap and get it going. But on the flip side, that outdoor area can still have things going. You could maybe do a little bit on a very cheap light to get you going for vegging inside in just a random space. I've got a buddy who does this and then composts all year, then takes it outside and puts these decent sized, very healthy small plants. Like they're probably, not tiny. They're probably 3-4 feet tall out of the pot. So they're good sized plants. But for outside, starting at that in Michigan is huge. Then all of his nutrients are just compost over the year. It's literally just worm bin with scraps. Like it's the most byproduct, cheap, easy, affordable way to live. And so he uses a little bit of the very budget indoor. It's like like your bathroom. It looks just like your bathroom.
Ghetto? Yeah, I get it.
Not your main bathroom. The studio, our bathroom, bathroom.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Because
Composting is a good one.
yeah,
Yep,
dude, and
sure.
that's going to
And
save you a lot of money.
I like the idea, quick, before you do get into composting, because I think it's a great topic of discussion, the idea of using CFLs. The fact that you just mentioned you would start a veg indoors and then move it outdoors, that's when I think the conversation of CFLs is totally reasonable, because for relatively budget, CFLs are getting expensive, but for relatively budget, you could strap 4, 5, 6 CFLs that you probably already have around the house. Wife's makeup mirror is going to be a little darker for her, but whatever. You could get a solid veg stage, or at least a real good propagation area with a good CFL setup before you moved them outside. I think that's a really good point. Really good point. You want to talk about compost? Do you think that's a good one?
We
we've
talked a
touched
little
upon
bit,
it
but let's
other
in this
episodes.
episode just basics of composting and what compost is. I think would be a good touch on point. We don't got to go through the bokashi. We don't got to go through all the different, but just bare minimum is essentially you're taking your scraps, stuff that you would throw away that's food, and some even paper in your sense. You work on using paper for yours, and taking this and you making this into a soil, like your soil. You can add it into your soil. It's a nutrient-rich soil that you can create, or you can do a compost or a tea with your compost. I've seen people do that as well, but ideally, this is something that is just extra. It's your byproduct. It's extra stuff that you'd have. Some people will use animal byproduct for it. We'll say manure, doo-doo. And
Fish.
others will just use food. They'll use food scraps, vegetable scraps, There's there's a lot of ways to do this with just literally being in a backyard, in the city, in the suburbs, working on your own compost for an indoor grow. But when you have an area to have a compost pile outside, that's a nice setup that you can have potentially year round, depending on where you have it.
Chop and drop.
Chop and
Kind of
drop.
relates to it is that, that's another way to keep it at bare minimum. That's another way to not only have a mulch layer, and I don't know how well you
with
guys
the
know about
leaves.
chop is.
With
Yeah,
the-
yeah. So when
yeah.
you're
Oh,
like
yeah,
defoliating, taking off leaves, whatever, and just dropping it directly onto the medium. So it's acting as a mulch layer, but there's breakdown happening. There's nutrient cycling that's happening with those microbes, and those are eventually turning into nutrients for the plant. So you want to be with bare minimum, keep it cheap when it comes to nutrition. Chop and drop method is something to look into for sure.
Yeah, that's a good idea. That's a good idea. I guess there's kind of a misconception out there that that's going to lead to bugs and mold
Pests and all that stuff,
Yeah.
yeah.
And
Certainly can have pests. It gets overpopulated, right? Roly-polies is a good one where it can get out of control. But a lot of those are just decomposers, actually beneficial. A lot of people, they think, oh, it's a pest. There's a difference between a pest and a beneficial insect,
Massively. Yeah, pest is something that you don't want. That is a pesky pest.
a pest is what
bug
Rob and Chris consider
or a-
me.
So those chop and drops and stuff, it's just,
Well, that's the thing with the chop and drops is I've always been worried about getting gnats by too much moisture. Now, there's a fine balance, obviously, and that's in your watering then at that point, right? Since you're going to be able to retain the moisture with that top layer as a
yeah, you
your
got to
mulch
layer
layer.
over your
Yeah.
soil.
Okay.
So, yeah,
you want to make sure that you're watering better.
There'd be a reduction in gnats.
Oh, and that's I think the issue is a lot of people don't change up their watering at that point, not knowing that you're retaining the moisture longer. So now you're overwatering your plants and you're causing that issue. But then with the water side of things, what about on a budget? We talked about this in natural alternatives for home growers episode. But what about avoiding your pH up and down? Unless you're pigeons and you're lucky as hell to just have beautiful water, what would one do? Well, then you just not do. You'd either buy your pH perfect nutrients, which is definitely not a part of bare minimum, or would you go organic and make sure you have a buffer of some sort of pH buffer in your soil? Or then would you use a natural remedy to lower your pH?
I think it starts with your water source, right? So it's like, you're going to use tap water. Do you have a well that you're going into? Looking at those first, and talking about the bare minimum here, but it's always advised to get a water test to see if whether or not. I actually got a water test this year, and had Dr. Bryant Mason. I don't know if he's a doctor. Bryant Mason, the soil
We're going
doctor.
to call him Doc.
He's the soil doctor. I think he has a PhD, but I had him take a look at it for an episode, and he had pointed out that you got salty water. Like it's really not recommended to use this tap water because it's just so salty. High in bicarbonates as well, which is going to increase the pH. That could throw things off. So looking at your water source to begin and seeing if it's usable or not, or do you need to filter it? A lot of people are using it straight out of the tap. Bare minimum, just watering in there. Sure, their plants are going to have deficiencies, but they'll still get to harvest. It goes back to the person who doesn't really care about bag appeal, just wants the effects off of the final product. So you can go that route, or using collected rainwater. You can use it from a lake, which shout out to Mama Kush 420. There's keep it cheap that way.
I think it's important to mention too. It's like bare. Oh darn it! I had 2 points and I just forgot the first one. I'll continue on with bare. Oh yeah, everyone's bare minimum is going to be a little bit different. As you mentioned, you think checking your water, getting an understanding of your water, and the test is a part of that bare minimum, right? And that's fair. I would not consider that as part of the bare minimum because I have great water, and it's just not something that I consider. So a bare minimum for me might not include that, but a bare minimum for me might be an excessive amounts of pH down, or an excessive amount of something to, maybe I've got high iron in there or something, and I need to kind of neutralize that or lower, have a nutrient. We said that a pH perfect nutrient. Maybe that's just something a bare minimum needs. So I would just
Subjective. Very subjective.
I would just look at your situation and see what does it require.
But talking about pH up and pH down, if
Please.
I may hijack this for a minute.
Please.
All natural way, things you might have around your house. Baking soda, you might have lemon juice around your house, right? You might have vinegar. Those are things you can use as pH adjusters. Throw that in there.
That's good. No, it's perfect. I was going to kind of move on, and when it comes to the bare minimums, What about the bare minimum for the growth and the style? If somebody wanted to get going and just wanted to do the bare minimum, do they have to top it? Do they have to bend it over? Should they apply any kind of training? Should you do any trimming? Should you defoliate? Is there a bare minimum that you can do to the growing style of the plant itself that's going to help you benefit? I would argue, yeah, there is a bare minimum. And for me, as you just saw in the prop 10, is like you got to remove some of that foliage, some of that bottom just cluster of small stems, small shoots, small leaves. It gets bushy in there. It gets moist. It gets nasty for bugs. You want good airflow. And I think training for me, bare minimum, if someone said I could only do one thing, you need to make sure you defoliate or just keep a good clear undergrowth. Manicure.
They can get airflow throughout there. Yeah,
you just need good airflow. So bare minimum
prevents
training.
the hot pockets, humid pockets forming, right? You don't want to have powdery mildew and stagnant air in the middle
and
there.
You're already using bare minimum everything. You ain't taking care of that powdery mildew at that point.
Other than that, you can let the plant grow without training, really. There are risks involved, right? So like bud rot, for example, right? It's like the bigger those colas are, like if you have that one massive cola coming up and it's super huge and there's a little bit of lack of airflow and there's some humidity in there, you get bud rot, and then you're wiping out that part of the bud, and arguably some people throw away the whole plant. They just don't believe in chopping off the bud rot and keeping the rest of the plant. So yeah, cut back and try to do the bare minimum without doing any training or anything, but just be aware of the risks associated with cutting back and doing the bare minimum on some of these things.
To piggyback off of that, the bare minimum is something that a technique I like to use when I'm doing a brand new genetic. I don't like to do anything to it other than, as I said, the bare minimums. Just keep a good, clean undercarriage and ensure airflow. And the risk that I ran into, or the problem that I ran into, was that because I didn't train it, I have no idea how tall that girl's going to go. And a couple of those OGs on me, they whoop. So I was dealing with plants that were about a foot plus away from my light. Got me a little bit worried because, there was a risk involved that I didn't train it. So I'm at the genetics whim of how much it's going to stretch, how big and bushy it's going to get. So, yeah, there's risks involved, and I think risks involved is kind of like the underlying variable when you're going to go bare minimum. It's not like you're just trying to be efficient and effective. You're doing bare minimum, and when you do that, there's a reason that we just say, there's a bare minimum, and then there's a 1, 2, 3 after that, because it's going to keep you clean, sterile, and free of bugs.
Yeah. Well, and then let's look at even in the sense of maintaining your perpetual grow. Bare minimum could be just one and done. Just run one cycle, maybe 2 a year, however many you can fit in, 3, 4, depending how long you veg, and you're done.
How much do you smoke?
And how much do you smoke? You only have one tent or one open space or one greenhouse, whatever you're doing. So you just one cycle essentially. That could be your bare minimum. It's like, I just grow a couple crops per year. Or you're somebody who then, again, you're like, well, I'm not going to self-pollinate and get seeds from here. I'm not going to take the time to clone it. I'm not going to do the time to any of this extra growing it. It's done, and I was popping in seeds next time. There's a bare minimum in effort, and there's a bare minimum in investment, too. And I think that to make it as easy as you can on yourself, if you're busy, you could just continue to pop more seeds. Sometimes it's fun, to just keep. I grew 100 different genetics in a 2-year period with me and Trey that made no sense now in hindsight. But I was just like, ooh, what's the next one? Ooh, what's the next one? And that's cool. I mean, Pete, you do it sometimes too, but it's fun to get that process, but then you're spending more money. So it's not necessarily bare minimum in dollar, it's bare minimum in effort,
Kind of overlaps with budget growing, DIY, things like that. Like I started out with the clones from a friend, you know what I mean? So I didn't need to spend money to begin, so that's kind of starting out with the bare minimum, right?
Well, then you might just want to clone the clone and never get more genetics. I know a dude who had Trainwreck up until like last year, and he just kept cloning this clone forever. Once he got for free from a buddy, and he never paid for genetics. Nutrients were just simple 3-part general hydroponics. So it was cheap. It was pretty much Kool-Aid, but everything was so easy. At the bare minimum, he had the same winged hood with an HPS light in 2020 that he had when he first started 2008. Bare minimum. Never changed the bulb, and it never blew and died.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
That's right.
That's the bare minimum input. And sometimes you'll still get a good output if your genetics are good. If you have good genetics, you can do minimum. Other genetics, you have to do more. You can't do the bare minimum in terms of input and think you're going to get the output of that.
What do you think the bare minimum that you should be in your tent is? I have my own bare minimum. I know what my bare minimum is. What do you think yours is, Chris? At what point do you think you're being too lazy and they're going to die and you're in there checking every 30 minutes to see if they've grown? Was there a fine line for you? What's the bare minimum?
It's a tough question to answer because it's still variable, right?
Sure.
Like, what's your setup?
So many
Are you in a
variables.
large container? Are you like a soil bed, for example, which you could, with a small plant that you water and you can literally leave for 2 weeks and then come back and there's still moisture in the medium and the plant hasn't grown high enough to reach the light? Or are you in small containers, big pots, right? So it's like, it totally depends on what your grow setup is, what you got going on there, to how frequently you're going into your grow space. Now, for me, kind of current style, I'm going in one to two times per day is when I'm going in there and just checking on the plants. I'm not doing an action every time, you know what I mean?
Opening, looking.
But opening, looking, make sure everything's good, checking the moisture content in the medium, pests, checking for pests. What's the bare minimum on that? I think that's a good question. And I think there's a lot of different answers on that as well. Some people like every single day, go in there every single day with the scope. Other people like, you
Once
don't
a
need to even
week.
go in there at all. If you're going indoors, you don't need any IPM measurements. Just change your clothes before going from outside to
I've
inside.
seen comments like that. Nah, you're just wasting time and energy. I never seen much in my life. Like, where do you live? Like, I live in the driest part of the world. Temperature never swings. Things are comfortable and there's no plant life outside. No animals or kids. Oh, yeah.
Live in a vacuum.
But yeah, the bare minimum of the frequency that you go into your garden, I think, is highly dependent on what your grow setup really is.
I agree with you on the once
many
a day. I personally think you as a human being deserve the peace and the serenity to take some time out of your day and to soak up your hard-earned efforts and take in the reward that I think planting this plant brings to us. So I think once a day is at least once a day.
I have to fill up humidifiers, so I'm going in there the second time of the day just to get in there and top things off so they don't run out.
Bare minimum, I think we can agree, bare minimum once a day.
But this is where automation, the argument of most good growers, automation just makes it so they can do that. They're still in there on top of their plants daily. They're still in there getting intimate with their plants, almost more so now because they're not having to do these tedious tasks that over time become, too much to even want to deal with for a lot of growers. And that's what moves them over to organics or to automation as a whole because they don't want to deal with it. That's where, again, the bare minimum effort and investment change because you may spend a lot more money to make it so the bare minimum of work is done, but you still get great results. I see people with light movers, with like automated up and down. I've seen people with automated watering, with things that move, like a plant tray that moves, all these things that essentially do stuff that would take the grower to go in and manually spin plants around, move them in other areas, bring the canopy closer to the light, stuff that is the bare minimum now of effort. And I think when you're getting into the point of like pests, like you were mentioning, or like going in to keep an eye on stuff, you can't fully automate that. It can unless your room is sealed, like you said, signed, sealed, delivered. You got your regular IPM that maybe you're doing once a month. Can't get too low on that. I still think once a day is like you have to, even if it's just opening the little window in the tent. Looking, you don't got to get in there and move every single plant, check everything. That should be at least once every 2 weeks, in my opinion, to go and like really get intimate in your plants, looking, bending. If you're training your plants, you're going to do that. If you're watering your plants, you're going to do that. But if it's fully automated, you may get too lackadaisical, in my opinion, with that not checking on your plants.
Some people would think automation is a bare minimum. Right?
Subjective. What's your standards?
It's subjective.
And
My bare minimum is AI, and I want everything controlled.
That's right. That's right. And it has to cost $5,000 whole setup. Bare minimum $5,000. You're not getting anything good.
Yep.
I think that you're right. It is subjective, and I'd be curious to hear what anyone has to say in the comments below in regards to what do they think bare minimum is. What is it? What do you think it is? And nutrients. What's the bare minimum on nutrients? Do you need all the bud candies and all the phosphorus and the potassium, the sugars, carbs? Who knows?
Are you going to go base nutrients only?
That bare minimum. But what a great conversation, boys. And I think, again, we could keep going. We could keep going and with so many conversations. So I'd like to hear from everyone. I want to give a huge shout out to our patrons for supporting us. We would not forget you on each episode. Thank you
Near your
guys.
shoes?
Sorry, get my feet off
Move
the
the- thank
table.
you.
Sorry, guys.
Move
That's
the riffraff
very
real quick.
disrespectful. Come on in,
Move the
Lex.
fruit
Come on in,
not like it's
please.
his own house or anything.
No, come on in.
Much
Come
love.
on in.
Thank you guys. I'm gonna move the young worder bottle.
We appreciate you guys so much. That's patreon.com/fromthestash. You guys are legends, allowing us to come together each and every single week. They don't fly every week. They take dog sled. And
It's not easy to get out here,
this
man.
is the inside of
The
an
dogs
igloo.
are all from Montreal, so they don't understand what I'm saying either.
Oh, mush.
Moosh. They're like, huh?
Shout out to Wink on the ones and Qs.
Ones and Q's and T's
Ones
and
and
fours.
Qs.
Thank you, brother.
Make sure stashmerch.com if you want to represent the brand, show some love.
You got the new style, man. I got the vintage.
Yours
That's
That's
looks
the
vintage.
vintage. That's the vintage.
No, this is new.
I got to get it.
That's
That's the
ghetto.
new.
Oh, that
This
is
is the
you're right.
vintage.
You're right. I was
Yeah, I
thinking
don't
Stash
think-
Blend shirt.
I don't even know if these are available anymore.
That looks like Stash Blend died in the hood, and we did an airbrush for it. Rest in peace.
Mach ones. Yeah, you didn't make it. But guys, thank you so much for watching. I'm Pigeons. That's Mr. Grow It. That's ROB CLtv. Wink in the back. You in the front. We'll see you guys later.
Peace.
Peace.